Hi, and welcome to the Raw Heart and Soul podcast. Today, I have with me Paul Mondo, and you will have heard a little bit about him in the bio that I've just told you. I've known Paul for, what is it, Paul? About 8 years?
Oh, yeah, I think 9 years now, about 2012.
Wow. So Paul came into our gym as a walk-in, like when you had the childcare centre around the corner up in, not in Airport West, in Tullamarine, and looking to find a gym, and you've been with us ever since, haven't you?
Yeah, you haven't got rid of me yet. So, yeah, poor you. I'm sorry.
No, you've been one of my not best clients. All my clients are my best clients, but I think I get just as much from training you as what you do from me in terms of support and business encouragement and advice. I think sometimes I think that I need to be paying you rather than you paying me.
No, well, I think we've gone well beyond a trainer and coach client relationship. So
Absolutely, I consider you a very good friend. Paul, can you tell us a little bit about yourself in your own words? What do you do? Why do you do it?
What do I do? Well, look, I've been running childcare businesses, childcare services, which we now call early learning services, since 2001, basically. So I've been doing that for about 20 years. I started off helping out my parents in their business and built my own service, my first one in 2006. And the training wheels were off, and I was well and truly on board with helping support children and families. And I think that that was my goal. And whilst when I first left school, I didn't actually fall into this sector. Way back in year 10, when I did work experience, it was at a primary school. And it was actually the primary school my children now go to, which I didn't attend. So it was that capacity to help children was really a driving motive from a really early age for me, even though I wandered a little bit and went into something a little more corporate at that particular point in time. But definitely found that a bit... there was reward in working with children and families, and that was the goal. That was what I was trying to achieve with choices along the way.
Do you think that came from, so mum and dad both had childcare centre or had a childcare centre?
Yeah, look, my parents first bought their first centre in 1991. So I was 13 at the time. And from that age, I was always helping out, started off cleaning toilets and washing floors in a centre every night.
Same. I did exactly the same. My first job, yeah.
It was, I certainly started from the bottom up in this space. And so it was pretty natural. Just started high school, and after school, it was there every day to help them. And it was, mum had always worked with children at a school. She'd worked at my own primary school. But the reason they moved into a new business or a new sector was because dad had had a heart transplant in 1989, and they were looking for a new career, basically, because he was a concreter previously. And he didn't think it was wise to go back into such a hard labour profession straight after such a major operation. So it was in my blood from that very early age. And whilst I took 5 years thinking there's no way that I'd ever want to work in the family business, why would I go work with my parents? I ended up working silly hours in an office job, hating it, and went back to working with children, but B, working with family.
Where was your first centre? And was that standalone from mum and dad's, you said?
Yes, well, the first standalone away from mum and dad was in 2006. I started working with them full-time in 2001. That was after I'd left the job that I was in at that particular point in time. And so in that context there, it was very much... I wasn't sure that if you asked me in 2001 whether this was going to be my career and this is where I was going to stay, it probably wasn't. I was going through lots of life changes. I'd recently divorced my first wife at that time. And so I was in a state of flux at that point, and the future was very uncertain for me, but this was comfortable to go back to family and be able to work there. And I was lucky enough for them to take me. They probably didn't need me, but they certainly were as always keen to help and support me. And hopefully over time, I acquired the skills and knowledge that I was actually contributing back in a meaningful way, not just them helping me out. But yeah, it was a very, it probably took me about 2 or 3 years to feel like, well, actually, no, this is what I want to do moving forward. And in the meantime, we'd bought land to build this next centre. And so one of my jobs was to help manage the build of the service at that point in time. And by that stage, I was all in. There was no backing out at that point in time.
Did you cop flack from other people, like friends or other men? Because it's not what, and this might be just like my opinion and my view, but it's not normally a career that a man would normally choose.
Look, not from friends. I think the first time that I noticed it might be different or there might be a negative perception to a man working in a centre was about 2006, when I actually had opened my first centre, and I was running the place without my parents there and my mum there in particular. At the start, we had lots of new families coming through, so you're giving them a tour. And there was certainly, there was two parents in particular that very much directly questioned why I was working in this particular sector. And, and I found it confronting because I didn't actually, I didn't think of it as being out of place. I didn't think that there was anything, different by me being involved in this circumstance. And so I did find it confronting at the time. But look, they didn't attend the service, and we were successful pretty quickly. Aside from that, and I respect people's choices, but I hope that in 2021 that we're in a place where men are more accepted in our sector, although that's probably not true. We still have of our workforce about 97% are female at this point, so it is really difficult, and that's for a whole range of reasons for men to join the sector. Look, some of them who start doing the course move out, and a lot of that is because there's a bit of a resentment to seeing men perform certain functions. And look, even in some services where I know I was talking about this actually 2 weeks ago with somebody, where men go and do their work placements and get told they're not allowed to change nappies at a particular service. So it is really hard. I mean, I'm fortunate. It was my business, so I didn't really have anybody pushing me not to do something or to do something in that space. But it was, it's still certainly a handbrake on the sector that there's not more diversity there.
Tell me again, your role as the head of the Australian Childcare Association?
Yeah, so I'm now national president of the Australian Childcare Alliance as well. I've been doing that role for as president. I'm into my 4th year in that role. So we represent about.
I remember when jeepers, it doesn't seem like that long ago.
Yeah, it's in some form or another. I've been representing the sector since about 2011 in different roles. But yeah, that national presidency was this is my 4th year. So it's and I suppose it's in that context that I get to hear these stories about some of the challenges that we face in attracting a diverse workforce more generally, but men in particular.
Is the Alliance working to change that or to try and address that? Or are there other things that are more important at the moment that need to be addressed other than that?
Oh, look, we've always got lots to address. I think, community perceptions are particularly important. And so it's often not that, because I can assure you that when men are looking for a role in the sector, they will find a role in this sector. But those community perceptions there certainly help keep people away from choosing our space. And a lot of them, what tends to happen is men don't do the vocational courses that qualify people to work in our space, which is a Cert 3 and a diploma. But many of them will do a degree-trained teaching degree that is for children from birth to 8, which means they're dual early childhood and primary teachers. And so as a result of that, a lot of those men move into the primary teaching space rather than the early childhood space. So, you know, it's, I said it's not just community perceptions, but which might be a reason for them to choose or not to choose that, but it certainly makes it harder for them when those prejudices exist in their choices.
So is that one of the things that you're working towards with speaking to politicians, because I know that you do that, trying to bring early childhood education into the same, or have it seen as important as primary school?
Look, certainly, you know, we would argue that it is equally as important as primary school. In fact, we'd argue that much of it is more important than primary school, and that's not just our bias to our sector. That's just because of brain development in children under 5 and how significant the plasticity of the brain is then, and how pliable they are to new skills and learning. So if there are, you know, there is a mountain of evidence to support the fact that engaging in early childhood education from at least 2 years before school has both short-term and long-term benefits to children's academic achievements, as well as social and wellbeing outcomes from there. So, you know, we obviously continue to prosecute the case that it is important. What is unique about our sector compared to the schooling system is that it's delivered by a diverse range of organisations out there. So, you know, and that differs from state to state. So you have small not-for-profit services, small private providers like me. You have large not-for-profit providers. You have large-scale corporate providers out there. In Victoria, you have local council delivering preschool. You have, and that differs. The preschool delivery model differs from one state to another. So it is a real different mix that delivers that, which makes funding for it a little more complex. But you know, we know that affordability is a barrier for some families, and continuing to work at ensuring that A, we are as affordable as can be for those families, but B, that investment keeps up with the cost of delivering a high quality service, because like anything, there's quality is really critical to the outcomes for the children engaged in that particular setting there. So quality of the teacher, the quality of the educator, the quality of the interactions, the quality of the leadership of the service help drive better outcomes for children. So it's you know, a bad service with low quality is certainly not going to be helpful for children, or as helpful for children. In some cases, may be harmful for children as well.
Why is there such a different range? So anywhere in Australia, you go to primary school or you go to high school, you expect a similar education, what you deliver. And I know what I was delivering in set 3 and set 4 for fitness when I was teaching it. You could come and have it delivered by us at VFA, and you can go and have it delivered by Fitness Australia or whoever else, and it would be the same core curriculum. Why is it not the same across for early learning?
So look, there is. We're governed by the National Quality Framework. That's our national regulation piece. That was introduced in 2012. And what that does is mandate ratio and qualification requirements nationally, as well as a whole lot of other regulatory components. Prior to that, regulations were state-based and significantly different from one state to the other. Surprisingly, or unsurprisingly from our sector's perspective, whilst we have a national legislation, there are still distinct differences from one state to the other in how those regulations are applied and how they might work from one state from there. And then we have the Early Years Learning Framework, which is a framework's curriculum to help support the education of children there. Because early childhood education is delivered through play-based curriculum and play-based learning, it is certainly far less prescriptive in terms of a school system, but because it is not developmentally appropriate to provide a prescriptive direct teaching education to children under 5, in fact, to children under 8, truthfully. But that play-based curriculum is absolutely fit for purpose. It is consistent, but it is also open to the differences of the teacher or educator delivering that program and how they interpret that. So,
teachers, yeah.
Yeah. So look, I think what is consistent is that, well, what we know is different. So if we look at the year before school, kindergarten as it's known in Victoria, or preschool as it's known in New South Wales, it is certainly delivered in different settings. So that particular year before school in Victoria is traditionally delivered either in a council-run service or in a childcare centre, an early learning service. In Western Australia and Tasmania, it's part of the school system. And in Queensland and New South Wales, there's a hybrid approach there as well as South Australia. So it's not the same. And I think that there's lots of misconceptions there about if it was in the school system, it would be better. But one of the challenges in the school system is it's far more rigid. And so there tends to be an increase in structure and more direct teaching methodology, which is actually not
the children of that.
Exactly, it's not the best pedagogy available at all for them. So I think early learning services, early childhood education care centres will deliver, when delivered well, deliver that play-based pedagogy, which delivers the best outcomes, and that flexibility is really important. But there are some key differences. We're a relatively small country, Australia, but there's 4 different school starting ages across the whole of the country.
Is that right? Because I thought that had changed. When I was in school, they were talking a lot more. I grew up in Canberra, for people who don't know, who listen to this podcast. And with a lot of things, Canberra and the ACT seem to be very progressive in terms of talking about things. And I thought when I was in school, they changed that. Yeah,
so as an example, if you're in Tasmania, you need to be 5 by the 1st of January before you start school.
Yep.
In Victoria, you need to be 5 by April 30 in the year you start school. In New South Wales, you need to be 5 by June 30 in the year you start school. That's the same in Western Australia and South Australia. And Queensland, I think it's sometime in July you need to be 5 by before you start school. So you've got this very, 6 months in a child's life is very, very significant. So if you're starting school at 6 or you're starting school at 4.5, which is actually the difference there that can occur, you've got a very different child. And it doesn't mean that age is the only factor in determining a child's school readiness. It's not, because they're all unique and they're all different. But it has a marked impact there. And if you think about, in most states, particularly where there's a young school starting age, parents have the choice about whether they send their child to school or not at the first possible year. They will have to by the second year of that circumstance. But in WA, you don't have a choice whether you start school or not in any given year. And only very occasionally a school principal who doesn't know the child in any way, shape or form until they are enrolled is the only one who can authorise a delay in enrolment for that child. And when they start school at 4.5, which is what some children will start school at, it's a really big issue there. And so I think it would be lovely if we could have a nationally consistent school starting age. In Australia, the most, I think Tasmania actually has the best outcome there. So basically the child has to turn 5 before they start school, would be a really appropriate juncture there. And so, even then, so if you think about that, that would make far more consistency across our nation in terms of children's educational outcomes, because even when they start to do standardised testing to test results and what have you, you're not comparing apples with apples when you're talking about age cohorts in this circumstance there. This will have nothing to do with a child's educational outcomes, but the first year of school is called something completely different from one state to another. So we have, in Victoria, it's prep. In New South Wales, it's the first year of school is kindergarten.
Yep.
Some states will have foundation as their first year of school. So you've got 3 different names for the same level of schooling that's supposed to be achieved. And that's, you'd think it's something that could be solved, but
it's just a name. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's, I think when you start talking about parents who move from one state to another, if they're one of the states that have a younger school starting age and they were to move to Victoria, for example, because in Victoria we do have a lot of children held back if they're turning 5, say between February and April. There can be such a massive difference in age cohort in the 1 year level there, and socially that's not great for children as
We
well.
found that, Andrew and I found that with Eden. So Eden is our youngest, and I think I've spoken to you about this in training times, but she's a young one, so she started her birthday's the 31st of March, so she's in year 8 now at school, at high school, and she doesn't turn 13 until the end of March. She was in a composite, so her first year of primary school was it was prep, and that was the only year of primary school where she wasn't in a composite class. So that prep year, she was okay. Socially and academically, she was fine for her to start school. And she was is the youngest of 6 children. So we felt she was ready, and we had that experience with our other children to know whether she would be not ready or ready. So we were confident that she was ready. But then when she went into grade 1 class, it was a composite grade of 1-2. And we knew this when we went into this school, and we chose the school because of location and because of the ability to access nature and a few other things. But in hindsight, it was probably not the greatest school for Eden. Have I still got you there? Year, which was above it. So year 1 and 2, then 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 at her primary school were all those composite classes. It wasn't until she was in grade 1, and it was about 3 months into it, that we noticed, and then the teacher spoke to us about it as well, that she was struggling socially. Because there were kids in her year level so that was what she was turning 6 when she went into that. But there were kids in her year level who had been kept back, who were actually 8 or turning 8. So I remember being shocked at getting a birthday invitation that first 6 months of an 8-year-old child, and my child had just turned 6. And I was like, okay. So she struggled socially at that point in time, and probably for about, in all honesty, about 9 months of that first year of year 1. But then when she went into year 2, because she was at that older level, she caught up. Academically, she was fine the whole way along, but that social aspect of it was big, and it happened at every year when she was that youngest one. So in year 1, and then in year 3, and then year 5 again. It was really noticeable. And I don't know whether that was because it was composite, or whether we had have noticed it that if she had it just in a year level of her own. I can't tell. But that changing, I think there's lots of factors, like you just said. There's factors that you need to consider when you're putting any child in school. It's not just that age. It is lots of different things. But it's an interesting.
And the gap is often socially. So, most children will survive academically in that context, and their learning will match their age cohort at that point in time. But it's really that social adjustment, and potentially, particularly in the first year of school, that if they socially don't cope, that then has a knock-on effect to their academic success through that first couple of years from there. So, and look, I mean, for me, these conversations with families are what I still love about the job that I do. And over time, as my business has grown and gotten smaller, and I've moved into advocacy roles, I think that was one thing that I miss, is really actually having those one-on-one conversations with families as often as I did before, and helping to hopefully navigate some difficult decisions that parents have to make as part of that journey of being a parent.
Yeah. So tell us about the advocacy roles, and why did, you had 2 childcare centres at the time that you took on the role, didn't you? And then what?
Yeah, I had 3 actually at that point in time. So I had, because mum had her service still then, and 2 other services. And look, I think I saw moving into this role as a natural extension of what I could do at a very micro level at a service, and that is help families and help children. Because in my service, what I would love to do was help children from vulnerable families, help children who had some vulnerability through their developmental concerns, or their inclusion because they may have been part of within the autism spectrum, or a range of other needs there. And so that helping that individual child and those more vulnerable succeed was a motive for me to do this job. And I hope that I was successful in doing that for those families that I engaged with at that point in time. But it started to get into, I think, well, how else can I have an impact? And the Alliance is a relatively large organisation in the sense that it covers all of Australia and covers over 3,000 services there. But with that strength, the goal is that hopefully we can influence policy outcomes with politicians for the greater good. Now, some of those are really big policies and some of those are really small policy settings that may not get much news about them. But moving into advocacy was about, well, I can not just influence my house, I can influence, hopefully, outcomes for some children and families across the whole of the country at that point in time. So that was a really big reason for me to move into the advocacy space in terms of my external and my why there. And I think, the other part of that was about growth professionally and how can I actually learn new skills. And I'd always worked in small business or family business, and moving through that, learning from new people, learning from putting myself in really uncomfortable positions, like sitting down and talking to a politician when I was new to this role was a really frightening experience. I used to shake walking into them, and I think that for me, I learnt so much about myself just throwing myself into something, even though I probably wasn't ready to do it on a whole range of different matters.
Are we ready like that though? Like, are we ever ready?
No, look, and I think I've never been one to shy away from taking on a new challenge. In fact, if I don't have something new that I'm working on, I'll get bored and lose interest pretty quickly in what I'm doing. So this was very much about doing something completely different to running a service and all of the parts of that, and going, well, okay, how can I find a way to learn how to understand how the political system works, to leverage those relationships that I need to build there, and to be respected with knowledge about our sector and the role that I play. And there were some hits and misses along the way, I've got to tell you, but I think it's still something that I'm learning to do as I go. I'd say that I feel more comfortable and confident than I did about it 3-4 years ago. But I was in Canberra just over a week ago and got to talk to probably about 25 MPs and senators there, and it was it's a new experience in every meeting, because you are either talking to people who are very knowledgeable about our sector and the policies governing our sector, or you're talking to people who have no real deep knowledge other than what they might read through media in that space. So you're always trying to either educate people about the sector and why it's important for them to vote for something or vote against something, or to help support our asks. Or you're really asking for those who are right in the midst of the decision-making about our sector to see investment in this space as a wise choice for them, and that you hope to tap into the philosophy of the greater good for children in particular. But sometimes that's certainly looking at it from the sense of, well, how can they grow in their own capacity and their own role and help them in their career by making this sector and this decision making important there. So it's never ending. And we had I'd say last year the most significant changes of policies that we've ever had, like 2020 being the chaos year that it was for the world. It was in March this time last year, we were looking down the barrel of our sector collapsing at this point in time. And so what we had to do, what we tried to do, and I think what we succeeded in doing was actually pointing out to government how our sector couldn't fail, and how the over
ripple effect that would have on the rest of society in Australia if it did.
Absolutely. And look, we were this time last year, we were literally talking about whether we'd actually be told to close down because of a lockdown, because of COVID. And I think our sector is still gaining credibility, broader credibility about its benefits in parts of the community. I don't think for those who attend.
Yep. Being a service for families who have parents who work, it's more than that. It's so much more than that.
Absolutely. So I think what last year showed, and this was, because the government actually supported our sector really, really well, was that we needed to be open for the most crucial parts of the workforce to continue.
Yeah.
We needed to be open to support vulnerable children and families. And obviously in Victoria being locked down for 6 months, it was very, very significant there that there was no cracks in support from all levels of government at ensuring that our sector was deemed to be essential in its own right. And that was a watershed moment for our sector. Doesn't mean last year was easy. We had lots of challenges through it, but it really elevated the perceptions of the sector to the broader community. And we hope that, what that means is over the longer term, that A, there's greater confidence in our sector for those who may not understand its benefits to date, but B, that policymakers continue to consider the importance of investing in children and their future as a really smart policy choice. So it's the challenge, of course, is that lots of families have a very short time engaged in our sector. So, almost one election cycle and many families fall in and out of the space. Yeah. Unlike schools, they're in that for 13 years. So policies influence those families over the longer term. So the political game for when there's a shorter engagement can be marginal at times, or can be perceived to be marginal at times. But I think that, there was research done late in 2019 in funding for the year before school, which showed for every dollar invested, there was a $2 return to the economy. And that was spread over the short and the long term there. So, the research is there, the evidence is there. And I think that the public has a greater understanding of its benefit, but we've still got a way to go to turn it into, to allow it to unleash its full potential.
And gain the respect that it deserves.
Absolutely.
I saw Eden's Childcare Centre as being, and I saw this with Kelvin and Timothy when they were in kindergarten, when they went to 3-year-old kindergarten, 4-year-old kindergarten, but I saw it as an extension of family, because it was, there was this battle in myself about the guilt of sending them there when I was at home, particularly with Kelvin and Timothy, because I was working from home, I think at that stage, I was. Am I sending them there just so I can give myself time, or am I I'm not the type of parent who likes painting or necessarily Play-Doh or things that are messy, and that's me being different to other people. I'm very OCD. So I balanced it out with I'm giving them the opportunity to do things that I wouldn't be able to give them because I choose not to. That kind of balanced out with my guilt about being at home when they were there, when they could be at home kind of thing, because I still had that thing of, I'm their mother, I should be able to care for them, all that stuff. But then I rationalised it when Eden went to childcare, because I was working. I don't have close family nearby. So I saw Honeybee as being her, that was the tribe. So that was my tribe, and that was what I couldn't give her in those areas. Those carers could give her. And she learnt different things from those people that I certainly couldn't give her. But is that something that you advocate for? That that's an absolute positive in my books for early childhood learning.
Well, I think historically, children were raised by a community, not just their parents. They lived and they had relatives around, partly because, parents had children
together. We didn't live in cities and states away from each other.
Parents were younger, generally. They would have their children at a younger age, so therefore grandparents were younger. So that sense of, the village to raise a child concept was real. That's exactly what happened. And that's less and less possible. And we can debate whether that's good or bad, but that's where we find ourselves today. And so a good service is a community. And it's a community where families engage, families meet, children are supported. And the idea is that we create a sense of belonging for those children to a broader community outside of their home, because home is number one. Home is the most important. And without a successful home life, it's really hard for a child to succeed, regardless of what else you might do in that to support them. But to succeed as humans, we are not just our immediate family. we're part of different communities, whether as we get older, whether that's a sporting club, whether that's a workplace, whether it's a vocation of any other capacity there. And so what we're hopefully is giving children that sense of belonging and that sense of being in the environment that they are. And so hopefully a good service will achieve that for those children. And you'll see what we do now in our services is then to try to extend that beyond the service setting in its own right and engage with the local community through our service for excursions and what have you, so that children know they're part of this broader world that exists there. And I think without that, for some families, it would be impossible. We're also in an environment today where we have so many more families that are dual income families. Both families need to work because the cost of living in our world is phenomenal, ultimately. It's not whilst we would certainly champion the educational aspects and that sense of community that children engaging with our service achieve, we also know that we need to look after and support their well-being to allow families to achieve as a broader thing. So yes, we care for the child and we educate the child, but we're also caring for a family in this circumstance. And I think that, what we want is for families to feel comfortable and confident so that way, when they go through their journey of life and the ups and downs that life exists, that, we're there for them to lean on and to support both them as parents in their role as parent and for the child, obviously, very directly on a day-to-day basis. And look, people say, if something's wrong, you see a doctor. But how often do you see your doctor? If you're not feeling well, if you've got all of these other things, who else do you see every day of the week other than if your children are there at a service 5 days a week? There is nobody. And so the role of anybody who works in our service, whether that's a provider, a service manager, or the educators working with children, is so critical at seeing those cues and really understanding how a family setting, so that there is open dialogue, because you don't know what you need until you need it as such. And if you don't have that relationship there, you don't, it was framed to me that way, that there is no one else that you see with the frequency of your early childhood educators and team. And so it is so critical that the environment that you choose for those children and for yourself is supporting you as well as, through the challenges that exist.
Yeah, and staffing and educating those educators is vitally important to that as well. And having them feel and know just how important they are.
Look, our educators do an amazingly difficult job. And from our perspective, a service I operate can't succeed without educators doing their job well. And they can learn, everybody can learn technical skills no matter what they are, should they want to learn those technical skills. The emotional intelligence, the interpersonal relationships that you need to develop, the empathy that is required is something that we all take time as humans to be able to learn how to do. And, I think sometimes they feel like they are, learning on the go and maybe not doing it as well as they could. But, for me, it's really about none of us are perfect. And, if you didn't feel like you achieved something at the rate you'd like to achieve it, what can you learn from that for your next opportunity where you might face the same situation? Because we do have to create those circumstances. We will come across those again. There will be a family having difficulty. There'll be a child who's hurt themselves. There'll be a child we have some developmental concerns about. How do we share that information, looking after the best interests of the child whilst being empathetic to how a parent might feel about receiving a bit of information about their child? They're all really, really critical and important conversations that need to be had. I think it's not necessary. That's not innate. it's a learnt skill.
Yeah.
You know, and as our friend Craig says all the time, Craig Harper, you know, you've got to get into the uncomfortable part to learn, you know, that's a challenge. It really is a challenge, and I suppose what I hope to do as a provider, as an employer in this circumstance, is to support their growth and support them through that journey when those difficult things need to be dealt with along the way.
How has your sector evolved since you started? So from when you started in 2001 to now, and has that been what you expected it would have been had I asked you 10 years ago? Would you have expected growth?
Oh, look, it's changed immeasurably in that time. So the national regulations have had a massive impact at emphasising and creating strong educational frameworks for children. And they were always there in some capacity, but our services were exclusively to support parents enter the workforce.
Yeah.
Now, the number of children that attend services has grown incredibly over that time. So, you know, we're up to, 4-year-olds in the year before school, about 94% of them attend an early childhood service of some description or a preschool. About 67% of 3-year-olds attend an early learning service or preschool. And those numbers have grown year on year through that space. And so it means that it's not just that there are more people entering the workforce, so therefore they need care. It means that they also recognise the benefits of the education that's being delivered. And so I think, could I have predicted we got to where we got to now? No, I didn't think that we'd be there. And it doesn't feel like 15 years ago that I was thinking about that. But we are doing really, really well at the moment. And there can often be lots of, being a strong media topic that we always are, there's always tends to be an intense focus on the negative, and particularly issues like, you know, affordability and how expensive it is and what have you. But I feel, and I hope that this is the case in my conversations with families, that if you took affordability outside of the discussion around our sector, those who actually engage with the service, who work with children, who see how well their children thrive being in the right services, how important the information they receive from educators and teachers is in the space, actually have a very positive engagement with the sector. Now, that won't be the case for every single family out there, but I actually, pretty confident in saying, in my view, a large majority of families would have that view of it. And I'm hoping that that's the case, particularly in my own services, in my own history. But, I think it's, we can be our sector can be talked down a lot by certain voices in the media. But unfortunately, what that often does is just undermine confidence for families who are already, as you said earlier, when you were making your own choices, have a sense of doubt as to whether they should be putting their children in care or whether they're comfortable putting their children in care. Often, then that's an internal thing, not about care in its own right there. So I think that we can continue to improve, and our system will continue to evolve and adapt over the next 10 years. But I suspect, and I hope, and in Victoria next year we have 3-year-old preschool being rolled out formally by the state government here. It's a really watershed moment at showcasing that it's not just the year before school that's important, is getting children to engage from at least the age of 3 provides great value and helps those children to extend on their learning about as to what they would normally do in their home environment. That home is the core of a child's life. That is the centre of their world. But having these layers fill in around it is also critically important at supplementing that learning and giving them a view outside of their own immediate world.
Do you think this is your sole purpose?
I think so. it's a really complicated thing because I look at two parts of what I do. I have what I do at a service level, working with families directly, and there are elements of that I still absolutely love to do. But that alone is probably not enough. The advocacy space I do, I think right now fills that purpose. What 10 years looks like, I don't know, because I think there's an evolution in where I will be at that point in time that I don't want to yet predict, because I'd rather deal with what's in front of me in that space. Certainly you plan and you're thinking ahead about what life looks like in the coming years, but feeling like I can contribute to society through advocacy is really important to me. It's a voluntary role. We do it for the love of it, and so I think for me, I get immense enjoyment out of it. And for a year like last year, where we were really, really successful at delivering outcomes, where we were able to see families have free access for at least 3 months to guide them through the real peak of COVID in the first instance. Those things drive me to continue hoping to achieve there, and it's a never-ending saga, because there will always be something new to try to achieve in the space. But right now, I love being able to do both. I love being able to work at that macro level and also still find a way to engage at the real micro level in the service as well. And when that might change, I don't know. I'm really comfortable and happy in this space right now.
I'm going to say one thing about something you just said in the previous answer to my question. I think that your sector is an easy target, which is why it gets pulled into the media as much as it does. And it's often used as a political hotball. Not hotball, but like a political tool in terms of the way it's portrayed in the media. It can be either bad or it can be either good, but I guess it just depends on the current climate.
Yeah, look, an advocacy strategy that is used to try to generate change is to create a crisis to compel change. And so I do a lot of work around systems change and systems thinking and the approaches to help adapt and grow in that space. And there are people out there at the moment trying to do that, to create that crisis in the sector. And that is because they, in their own right, they're doing it from a good place. They would like to see increased investment, increased funding, and try to elevate the success of the sector. Yeah. And if they succeed, that might be great. I am concerned in the short term that the problem with that is that it undermines the confidence for families in the sector. Yep. And B, really has a negative impact on our workforce, who are being told that their job they're not doing a good enough job, when they're actually working really hard and delivering great outcomes for children and families. And the sector has gone on this massive, significant change to quality over the last 10 years. Yeah. That journey will continue, but that will continue forever, regardless of the policy space. So from my perspective, my focus is on ensuring that we have a positive view of the sector, and that there is a lot of success within the sector, but nothing is perfect, and that we should be trying to improve outcomes for children, for families, whether that be through practice at an operational level, but also at a policy level from a government sense. So I think it's a very, very tried and true approach that people take to create this crisis, to generate change. But if they don't generate change, what's the collateral damage along the way? And is the long-term impact of that more negative when, so in our space, we employ roughly about 200,000 educators and teachers across the country. In 3 years' time, we're expected to need another 39,000 of them. because there is already some chronic workforce shortages, and the sector continues to grow. So if we can't attract those people because all they're reading is the bad stuff about the sector, then I'm not sure that that's actually helping children achieve what they need to achieve. So for me, that's how I look at it. I don't think sensationalizing anything for some other purpose creates a negative consequence and a negative view of the world. And hopefully I'm able to impact change in some way through with my colleagues in a way that doesn't need to create such a sense of terrible crisis.
Yeah. Last question for you, Paul. What is it about working in this field that you think is amazing and that the world needs to know about?
Oh, wow. So I think there is... I go back to when I first opened the centre in 2006, we had a little child start at that point, and we had only been open about 3 or 4 months in our own right. And he was about just under 2, I think, but he'd already begun undergoing assessment, and turned out he was categorised as having autism at that point. And I was very hands-on in the early days in the service. So, we did whatever needed to be done to succeed. And this child had really severe separation anxiety. And I took an approach to try to help engage the child and help him feel more settled. He went through periods of distress and needed lots of comfort. He wouldn't sleep at the service. So it took a lot to engage him and have him feel settled. He first started sleeping. We had to put him in a pram. He would sleep in my office in that pram. And then we migrated him into a stretcher that they sleep on in that particular age group. And because he was used to me being there, I would go and effectively lie on the floor, within sight of him. And seeing him grow and thrive and succeed through the next 3 years that he was with us was just amazing. And for me to feel like I played one small part in helping him, again, create that sense of belonging at the service, considering his own anxieties and his developmental concerns, was why I do what I do and why I believe that what we do is so important. And for all children to start to separate from their parents for the first time, it is hard. For a child with autism, it can be a lot harder. But our function is the same. Our function is for them to know that they're loved, for them to know that they're supported, and for them to know that their needs are going to be cared for in a way that ensures that they have the confidence to engage and succeed in play and learning from there. And if we get that part right, the rest of it flows thereafter. And so I think for me, it is really seeing that happen in real time. I know with all my knowledge that children engaged in our sector, when it's done well, will benefit immensely from it. And I know that those who love working in our space, that's the very reason they work in this space, is to see those out, build those connections, build those relationships, and see those outcomes succeed from there. And I think that we would love every child to have some level of engagement with the service. I'm not saying that this replaces what they have at home. It doesn't. But as a support, it's in addition to, it is really one of those key things. And I think that that's why the sector is so valuable. That's why I think that we see many good news stories or happy families when those children finish that journey through that service, through that part of their life, and they move on to their next stage, which is school. So it's what brings me back and centres me into what this space is. And I think it's also having the experience myself helps me advocate more strongly when I'm dealing with politicians, because I'm not a career advocate. I've come from the sector and I still have that day-to-day contact. And I think that, without that lived experience, it's really hard to show that same passion when you're trying to share those stories and trying to talk to people who don't have any knowledge about what happens from within our four walls.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. Thank you for being here today, Paul. I'm going to wrap it up there because that's a perfect way to end this podcast.
Thanks, Tanya.
Thanks for being here.
No worries. Bye-bye.